All right, guys, what is up? This is Brandon Osborne, aka Control for Days. I am here with this past weekend's Nerd Rage Gaming Championship Series. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Champion who piloted Golgari Yawgmoth to an undefeated record this past Sunday, took the whole thing down, swept the top eight, did not lose a single game in very impressive fashion. Like you introduce Chris Smith to you guys.
How are you doing? I'm Chris Smith, aka IglooBoi, on both Twitter and on Discord, if any of you guys recognize it. But I appreciate you having me talk about the deck and some of my matches.
Yeah, man. I'm excited to chat about your experience at the tournament. I think your top eight games. I didn't see your match in the Swiss. I saw parts of it. I didn't watch the whole thing through. So I'm excited to go through that match with you. We're going to go through all your matches. We're going to break down some of the lines, walk through your thought process as you were playing some of these games, and just discuss kind of the intricacies of this deck, which you and I both have become very fond of. And we'll talk about your. I think a good place to start is talking about your deck list. Why you chose some of the cards. There's a few unconventional choices in the 75. So why don't you take it away and tell us a little bit about your card choices and how you arrived at this list.
Yeah, for sure. So it's hard to exactly explain every part of this deck list because a lot of it is just like the mainstream list because you're running the 4 Yawgs, the 4 Yawgmoths, the 4 Stringerroot Geist, and then you have your 4 Nobles. All that is kind of like the core of the deck, and you have your tutors, which is like the Court of Callings and Eldritch Evolution. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of just like your main shell that you're always building around. And the funny part about this deck list is Saturday I was playing probably 67 cards, 66 cards of this pile, but I was running an Abzan list, running Knight of Autumn, Temple Garden, Takali Honor Guard, and then I was also running Coin Ritual, which I thought was absurd. I ended up winning a 3K a few months ago, nice. And I was like, yo, obviously this deck list is crap. Went to the NRG for the team event and completely bombed. Like I went 2 and 3. I lost to Hammer Time twice, and then I lost to Death and Taxes. And I was just like, how do I lose these matchups? And with that, I decided I can't win anything. I can't do well if I'm playing this deck list that I just completely fell on my face with. So I ended up changing it to Golgari and added, I put back in the regular mana base, kind of reverting back to the Golgari main strategy. Mm-hmm. But I'm running main deck Liberator because there was a lot of Hammer Time day one. And I wanted to make sure that I have answers to Urza Saga, because I also saw a lot of Amulet Titan. And I wanted to have these different win cons. Mm-hmm. And then in the sideboard, I was still scared of Hammer Time. I was still scared of Amulet Titan. And the best card up against those decks is actually Magus of the Moon, which sounds a little absurd, especially like Hammer Time. But your main strategy for Hammer Time is that Urza Saga getting constructs, picking up your hammer. And by going turn 2 Eldritch Evolution, sacrificing a mana dork to go get your Magus of the Moon, just wins the game on the spot. Or at least pretty close. So that's kind of why I played that.
So
I'm trying to think.
Can I chime in on that one?
Yeah, of course.
So that's a really interesting thing that I think a lot of people wouldn't think of, bringing that card, Magus, in against Hammer Time for its applications and what you just talked about. It's a card I tested a little bit, and I never thought to bring it in that matchup. So it's good that you said that because I think, maybe some people are playing the card but wouldn't know to play it in that matchup. And additionally, something that's really interesting is you're running a Magus, but you don't have a Stomping Ground in your list, which is something that's a little bit different from what a lot of people are doing who are playing Magus in their 75.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where 90% of the time you're not really casting Magus. And if you are casting Magus, you're trying to do it on turn 2 or turn 3. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, you're already playing your mana dorks to accelerate into it. And if you're not casting it that early, then Magus of the Moon becomes significantly worse in the matchups where you want it, which is Tron, Hammer Time, and Titan. Mm-hmm. So not having the red source as a land makes it more consistent of a mana base and less painful of a mana base. So being able to board those in and just kind of rely on your mana dorks and your Eldritch Evolutions is enough for me.
I've found that as well, that even it seems so minute, adding in one Stomping Ground or one Temple Garden to your mana base. But believe it or not, the mana in this deck is actually like really, really tight in spite of the fact that it's only a 2-color deck. Because you want double black on turn 3, and you only have so many black sources in the deck. So cutting one of those for a third color, it kind of messes with things a little bit.
Yeah, and in my testing with Abzan, like, you can't not have that Temple Garden because of the fact that your ignobles don't tap for white mana,
right,
which is the biggest downside. Where, like, Birds of Paradise, in this list, I was only running 2 birds, and not having that easy access to white just made the deck so much worse. And sometimes I draw the Knight of Autumn, and it just is kind of bad in my hand. But having a strictly Golgari mana base is so much more consistent.
Right. Which I think is where you want to be, because the deck is, I mean, mostly 4-ofs, with the whole goal of hitting a turn 3 Yawgmoth or a turn 4 Yawgmoth with an Undying Creature or 2. And yeah, once you start messing with the numbers, it starts getting a little squirrely in terms of your consistency. So,
100%.
your sideboard here, a couple of things that stand out to me when I'm looking at it. The Endurance is pretty standard. The Bailoff, the Thrun is pretty standard. Most lists are running 2 or 3 Necromentia, so that's nothing too crazy. The third one, I guess, is a concession to hitting like Tron and things like that.
So I honestly expected to be like playing against more of the mirror matches. So I could hedge a little more against the mirror match. That's why I'm running 2 main deck endurances instead of the 1 that most lists run.
Well, we all know it's the better build, 2 main deck endurances. So.
Oh yeah, it won me a game because I had 2 main deck, but we can get into that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But yeah, the 3 Necromentias ended up treating me very well because the worst matchups are the ones that are going to be a little bit faster than us. And like versus Belcher, versus Titan, Tron. There's another list that I can't think of off the top of my head. But these combo decks are just so much faster than us, being turn 3 combo kills. I just need to make sure to have that turn 2 Necromentia or turn 3 at the latest. And if you're running 2, you're not consistently hitting it, and there's a higher chance of losing because of it. But having that third one in felt super good, and I think it actually won me a couple of games because of it.
This is a little bit of foreshadowing. We might see this later on in the video a little bit. Unbeknownst to you. Maybe. So the biggest thing that stands out to me in your sideboard, which I think is a concession to what you talked about in your day 1 of this tournament, which did not go as well as you had hoped, is you've shaved on Thoughtseizes. Most lists are on 3 or 4 Thoughtseizes at this point, and you went with a full play set of Force of Vigor, just giving the giant middle finger to Hammer Time, saying, I am not losing this matchup. I am going to beat them to a pulp, into the ground, and not losing a single post-board game to them, I would imagine.
So, funny story about the Force of Vigors. So, as I said earlier, I had a really rough day 1, and I spent about 3 hours in the event hall trying to find Crime and Punishment. Because I got tilted at my Culling Ritual. Because during one of the matches, day 1, I went turn 3 Culling Ritual on the draw, and I'm like, cool, I should just kill my opponent from here, I just win. But my follow-up was only Walrus and Blood Artist. My hand was not shaping up very well. My opponent was like, cool, untap, Singarda's Aid, activate Yawgmoth, attack you, hammer, kill me. I was just like, I hate this card. I about threw away my 2 Culling Rituals immediately after because I was so tilted. And I spent 3 hours after we dropped trying to find Crime and Punishments. Couldn't find any in the event hall.
That's commitment.
So,
I'll give you a ton of credit for scouring high and low to find 1 or 2 Crime and Punishments, but
I almost drove 2 hours just to be able to buy 1 Crime and Punishment in foil.
I wish I was there. I would have I would have helped you out. I got some extras,
Oh,
so that's a
I
shame that
appreciate
nobody
it.
had any that they could lend you, or you couldn't find any from any of the vendors. But it seems like it worked out all right for you. So
It
let's
actually worked out very well.
it worked out pretty well. So let's jump into your first match here and take a look. And I guess this was a round 5 feature match.
Yes, sir.
Something that goes unsaid, or something that is not said enough when you're talking about being on camera, is if it's something you haven't done before, it is very nerve-wracking. You know, you kind of second guess yourself a little bit. Um, you know, you're periodically thinking, oh wow, there are a lot of people watching me right now, and you know that can mess with your play a little bit. So it's not the easiest thing. So I don't think people get enough credit when they're on camera. They make a mistake, or you know, they don't take the obvious line, because you know we're not all used to that sort of thing, especially now where there isn't a ton of paper magic being played all over the place. So
Yeah, and also like there's so many like small restrictions. Like for example, you're not allowed to use any of your own tokens. You have to use like Wizards of the Coast made tokens.
hmm,
Um, and then this is me just asking if I'm allowed to like move my force aside and have the spreading seas as an island. But the person was like, "Nope, you're not allowed to do that." So
I was wondering why every match I saw that was the way they presented the spreading seas, but that makes sense.
you know, it's just showing that like you have something over it. And then as you saw in game that first turn, is I didn't have a mana dork. Um, but I made sure not to have a mana dork in my opening hand for game one because of the fact that I knew what I was playing against. And in blue eye control, you're not trying to race. You're not trying to combo on turn three. This is a long grinding matchup, so I wanted to have a slower hand and try and make sure I had at least one grist to be able to punish my opponent. Um, like you can see that I have a grist in hand over there. Um, but I decided to go Stringerroot Geist because having 3 mana open, that either represents that they're going to have prismatic ending, which I don't want my grist to be prismatic ending, and I don't want it to be countered. So just holding it back to force action later.
Yep.
My thought process right there.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, they got 8 counter spells in the deck, so they're likely to have something in that spot. So I think that's the right play. The Grist is the most valuable card in the matchup. You don't want to just throw it in the graveyard, you know, 1 for 1 with one of
Yeah,
their spells that they can play at instant speed. So and I think on that note, you know, Grist is the best card in the matchup. That's the card you want to have resolve, and that's generally the line of play that you take to just cruise to victory, right?
yep, 100%. And then you kind of see, I just second guess my tapping because
There we
I'd
go.
rather have better tapping. But here's kind of where I make my first mistake. I get excited and overzealous, and I'm trying to find tokens, and everything's going on, and I forget to mill a card.
Okay.
Which isn't like a big problem because you want to have cards in your graveyard, but it's still a player that I made. It's kind of embarrassing to look back and be like, how did I miss this?
Yeah. I've done it before. It happens, especially once again if you're not playing a ton of paper magic. That's an easy thing to overlook. Did the judges say anything about that, or nobody caught it?
No one mentioned it or anything. So it's a little weird, but I feel really bad that I forgot it.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of one of those things. But
Well, if anybody
don't
asked, the
say
card you drew was terrible. So
100%. I'm never lucky. I always mill the worst card possible.
So our opponent is reading Grist, finding out that they're in a lot of trouble here. So through this game, you know, as I said, I didn't watch the whole thing. Did you wind up just riding Grist to victory here? Is that what wound up happening?
Are you trying to spoil the fun here? We're watching the game right now.
We're watching it live. So Outland Liberator, you're one of in the deck, an unconventional card choice for the main deck, but it's kind of the Golgari version of a Knight of Autumn. Kind of fills that slot if you're looking for some main deck enchantment artifact removal.
And the cool part is it does have relevant text in this matchup.
Yep.
It's not much, but being able to destroy Spreading Seas as well as Chalice of the Void
Mm-hmm.
is not a 0 effect, which is kind of cool. But at this point, I was kind of expecting my opponent to have a couple of counter spells and a March of Otherworldly Light. So I was trying to kind of play around those cards and just waiting for the right moment of attack.
It's impressive that you were playing around that card when it just got spoiled or just came out like a week ago. And to be honest, I think I've seen it played once up to this point, so there's no way I would have played around it. So that's kudos to you for having that on your radar.
I appreciate it. It's one of those things where I was trying to do as much research and just data gathering as much as I could the couple days before. And it's a card that I've been looking at for sealed because my buddy wanted me to kind of study up on sealed too so I could be properly educated when talking about deck building. So I was trying to get all those Kamigawa cards in my head, especially the channel lands. Like, oh my lord!
Yeah, they can wreak a little bit of havoc in combat and things of that nature. So
for sure,
they're all ridiculous.
Yeah, they're a little bit insane, but they're also really cool design cards. So
yeah, I am happy to have Viseju in our 75. I think it's an excellent card to have it out, and not really have much of a deck building cost associated with it.
Oh yeah, 100%. And then at this point, I kind of just like had the thought process of I'm gonna kill him with one way and one way only. I'm just gonna deal a bunch of damage to his face. So that was kind of my game plan here.
Yeah, and that's a lot of times how this matchup plays out. Their removal spells outside of Prismatic Ending, and I guess March of Otherworldly Light, is that what it's called?
So yeah.
Everything else is a destroy effect, and all your creatures, for the most part, are really resilient. So you're basically 2-for-1ing them anytime they want to kill one of your creatures with Supreme Verdict.
For sure.
And then Grist is not the easiest thing for them to get rid of. They have, one spell that does that.
Yeah. And then just a little more insight is I casted the Yawgmoth and the Strangleroot Geist. I also have a Yawg in hand at this point.
Okay.
And I was just kind of throwing those as test spells, seeing what happens. Worst case scenario, I can -2 my Grist, which I ended up doing, sacrificing the insects because I didn't want an uptick and then Supreme Verdict on my turn.
Mm-hmm.
So I sacrificed the insect because I was expecting a Supreme Verdict. So then my Undying creatures would come back with higher powers. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what I was playing around at that point.
To get rid of the Teferi you're talking about specifically.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. Yeah, so that's generally, I feel like when you're playing against blue-white control, they tend to be on their heels. They're very reactive to what we're doing. In a way, I feel like they alleviate that is by being able to play at instant speed, specifically Supreme Verdict. So getting rid of Teferi is very relevant for that reason.
For sure.
Make them tap out on their turn to cast the spell, and they're still behind because you have 2 Undying creatures, and then you can land a bigger threat on your turn, on your follow-up.
Yeah. And then at this point, like, I just slam a Grist just to see if they have the counterspell, force them to use it. Because at this point, I still have the Yawg in hand. I think I might have overextended by casting the birds, but at this point, I was so far ahead that I don't think it mattered.
Yeah. So he's at 3 life at this point. He's basically got to remove your creatures 2 times to have a shot.
Yeah, it'd have to be a Supreme Verdict into a Prismatic Ending on my Strangleroot Geist, and even then, he still feels pretty far behind.
The swift toss of the Spreading Seas across the table, and we are on to game 2. So I don't know where game 2 starts. I'm going to try to fast forward just a little bit and not skip it, hopefully.
Well, we can also talk about sideboarding here too.
Yeah. That's a good idea. So what's your strategy in this matchup with regards to your ins and your outs?
Yeah, so at this point, it's just a pretty basic strategy of I'm going to want my endurances. So I board in my 2 endurances, and then I also board in my Throne the Last Troll, which is like my favorite card in the deck.
Yep.
And then I ended up taking out my Essence Warden because Essence Warden is a card that allows you to be able to combo off on turn 3 or 4 very easily. But this isn't one of those style of matchups. I also took out my Outland Liberator because it doesn't do enough to make it worth it.
Right.
And then, if I remember correctly, I took out my Outrage Evolution because of the fact that you don't really want to sacrifice your creature for your spell to get countered. It kind of can be very awkward at times. So I ended up trimming on those so I can play a more proactive cast Endurance on my opponent's turn to force them to deal with a counterspell on their turn as well as my turn and continue to apply pressure.
So you're pulling some number of Eldritch Evolutions, you're pulling Liberator, you're pulling Essence Warden, you're bringing in Thrun, you're bringing in 2 Endurance. One of the cards I would have a question about is, are you bringing in any discard? Are you bringing in any Necromencias or Thoughtseizes in the matchup?
So I didn't bring in any Necros because it's one of those things where you're not really like Necro is fine because you can name like Solitude, but you don't want to overboard because you just want to have a higher creature density,
right?
Just to continuously apply pressure. And Thoughtseize is a card that seems fine in this matchup. It's just not something that I'm a huge fan of because I'm trying to play this proactive strategy against blue-white and trying to just go turn 1 creature, turn 2 creature, turn 3 creature, just keep applying this pressure.
Yep.
And by turning into a Thoughtseize deck, you're kind of slowing down your game plan so you can slow down theirs. And I don't think that's really where you want to be in that matchup. One of the key examples is the main matchups I bring in Thoughtseize is other combo decks that are faster. And then I actually bring it in against Burn.
Which I saw you posted earlier today in the Discord, and I was very surprised to hear that.
Yeah, so the biggest thing about like Thoughtseize is you're trying to do 2 things with Thoughtseize. You're trying to make your opponent's game plan slower, or you're trying to protect your creatures. And when you're trying to do this like proactive strategy where you're having a creature combo deck, Burn is trying to find those incremental advantages and just kill you with Burn, right? But the 2 things with Thoughtseize is if you Thoughtseize away a Boros Charm, you just saved yourself 2 life.
It's true. It's essentially gain 2 life is what it says.
The other thing you could do is you can name something like Searing Blaze,
right,
which is protecting a creature and it presents an extra 1 damage of face points. I don't know. But I think just that little incremental advantage is important enough to make it worth it.
Yep.
And I believe here I go Wall Roots into Ignoble. That way it makes it a little more awkward to like Prismatic Ending or something like that. It's been a day or 2 since I did this, so I can't remember for sure. But yeah, that's why I bring in Thoughtseize versus Burn.
With this line, it's a Strangleroot.
Oh.
Which is a fine turn 2 play in this matchup.
Yeah, this. I was watching the commentary on this, and it's super funny because the commentators are like, and this is probably one of the matchups where they're going to combo off because you're trying to set up this board state to just win the game. And then I was watching, and he's like, all he's doing is playing 1/1s and 2/1s.
That's all you need to do. That's I mean, they don't die, hence the undying mechanic, and they enter the red zone. They get the beats in, so that's all you need, to be honest.
For sure.
It's interesting.
I was just gonna say, I think this is one of the big misplays of the game. I don't like the idea of Prismatic Ending there because you have March of the Multitudes in hand, and that's just making your game plan a little slower, not being mana efficient. Plus, you're not able to go Prismatic Ending on a future Grist or something like that.
Right.
But I thought I had Wall Roots and Birds in hand.
You did. Your memory has served you correctly. So they get a 2-for-1 with this Supreme Verdict here. Your opponent is Jacob. Jacob gets a 2-for-1, and then you're able to sneak in the best card in the matchup after he Supreme Verdicts. Is that something you're holding in your hand, waiting for that moment, or is it something you drew that turn?
So I actually didn't have a 3rd land in hand. That's why last turn I had to go Wall of Roots into Bird.
Yep.
Um, but luckily I was able to draw the land to have the nice timing of Grist. But my opponent had another Prismatic Ending in hand, so I was like, all right, we'll see what happens from here.
And you get a little bit of value out of Grist there anyway, in that, you know, you have the insect in play now, so it's not the end of the world. Did we forget to mill again?
Yeah, I did forget to mill.
I just noticed that. I think of that as like a mistrigger. That's not a misplay. That's just like a little detail that, you know, sometimes gets overlooked, but happens to the best of us.
For sure.
All right, so we're flashing Court of Calling end of turn, or in response to the Teferi.
And I'm just going X=1 to grab Yawgmoth, just because that applies 2 1/1s to be able to attack the Teferi.
Yep.
Or my opponent could +1, but he decides that the right choice is to minus, so he gets the card advantage at least. But in this matchup, it's all about applying pressure, keeping planeswalkers off the field, and then trying to accrue your own advantage and win the game. But this is the funniest turn of the entire game, I feel, is when my opponent's like, all right, I think I'm okay this turn, so I'm going to cast Gideon. I was just like, oh no.
He doesn't
Gideon
know.
makes it so I can't kill the
Teferi. He's going to be able to say that this Yawgmoth, I believe it prevents something from dealing damage.
Audio turned on. Hold on one second.
It would deal, and then it can maybe even be a...
Not sure why that happened. That was odd. They shared your enthusiasm, so they wanted to chime in here.
For sure. That Gideon play like threw me off. I wasn't ready for it. Because right now it's closed deck list. I don't know what my opponent's playing. Minus like the basic blue-white control list. So the Gideon ended up protecting the Yawgmoth, or protecting the Teferi.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to come up with some other way to like play this game out.
So there's the namesake of the deck making his debut appearance here in your feature match.
And the best lane drop in the deck.
Got the Dryad Arbor in play. And we attack.
I attack for authority. I did 0 damage because Gideon prevents all damage, but I wanted to have a good blast. So I was like, I attack for 0.
It's good to have some fun out there. I mean, that's the reason we do this, right?
For sure. And I couldn't get punished by it because my opponent was tapped out. So I made sure it was safe before I just willy-nilly attacked for nothing.
So one of the things that's important to note with Yawgmoth in this matchup is that often he gets removed the turn he comes into play. But just the ability to generate, you know, here you have the ability to draw 3 cards off of him and still have a Yawgmoth on the board. Having the ability to do that is usually enough to pull you ahead where your opponent can't recover. So just sticking one Yawgmoth with a little bit of a board presence is just so much advantage that it's hard for a blue-white opponent to catch up to that a lot of times.
You can even see right here, my opponent has 2 cards in hand. I have 4 cards in hand.
Oof.
And it's just, he's in such a bad spot right now. Which I'm a little confused because he has March of Otherworldly Light in hand. But he doesn't exile Yawgmoth on his own turn, which allows me the ability to set up.
Little perplexed by that as well. I'm not exactly sure what his line of thought is there. Maybe he thought he had some time to figure things out, but
yeah, this matchup there's no time for my opponent.
No. So, well, he's in a world of trouble now because you have 15 life and the ability to draw up to 14 cards right now. So
for sure. And at this point, I just want I want to draw some cards, but I don't want to lose to something like a Shark Typhoon, making a Shark token. So I kind of just do a little bit of shenanigans, not too much, but enough to get my hand full again.
Yep.
My opponent's like, well, trigger on the stat. Let me think about this, which kind of shows me that they have either Solitude, March, or some other weird exile effect that I don't know of. But he kind of just let me kind of do my thing, trying to find the right time to do his interaction.
Yep. Which there isn't any once you have a third undying creature on the board, unfortunately for him.
Technically, you'll find out right here that there is technically one point of interaction that there is. It's not like the best. And I probably could have played a little more around it, but I was so far ahead that I wasn't super worried about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I go Outrage Evolution, sacrificing Yawgmoth to go get my Blood Artist.
Okay.
And then on the back of the Outrage Evolution, dealing with my Yawg.
Yeah, so I think in that sort of instance, personally, I would just fill my hand up and pass the turn, hoping to pull a cord off the top to be able to play at instant speed.
Yeah.
So I might have taken a little bit of a different line there. I think it's fine, but
for sure.
Obviously, you didn't expect him to have this in his hand, given how long Yawgmoth had already lasted. So it was
I already drew 30 cards. So I figured if he had it, he should have used it already.
Right.
But he had it in hand, so I got a little punished for this. But I mean, it wasn't the biggest problem. So I just drew some cards trying to find a quarter calling or something.
And we're shortcutting the effect right there for those who are watching and maybe not familiar with what is going on. Activating Yawgmoth, targeting an undying creature, sacrificing the other one, triggers undying, removes the 1/1 counter from the one that had it. And that's the loop of the deck that provides the card advantage that is so characteristic that we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
So it's your make your own Yawgmoth's bargain. So there goes Yawgmoth. Did you wind up drawing another one?
I think I had another Yawg in hand, but I wasn't super worried about it for right now.
Right.
And then I accidentally put the -1/-1 counter on the Yawgmoth that I sacrificed because I wasn't thinking about the fact that when it leaves the battlefield, it'll come back as a new one, so it's no longer targeted by the Yawg.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just another misplay, just because I haven't played as much on paper as I was prepared for. So there's some weird nuances that I wasn't ready for. But at this point, I was just throwing a grist on the table and telling them, cool, I need you to have 2 Supreme Verdicts and a way of dealing with grist to win the game.
Which I'm guessing he did not.
Luckily, he did not have double verdict to present.
And there's no colonnade under there either, is there? I can't really tell from.
No. There was no colonnade at this point.
Oh, he just drew one.
He did just draw one.
What do you know?
So at this point, I was kind of being a little cautious on that aspect because I didn't want to get pumped by a colonnade in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was one of the worries, is one of the random flyers being able to kill me. But
right.
At this point, I was just like, all right, let's just get in there for some damage.
Not blocking a colonnade anyway, so.
Yeah. I mean, I put enough pressure on my opponent to be able to kill them the following turn. At this point, my opponent only had 1 card in hand. So I was like, if I remember correctly, I just jam a spell. I think I just jam a Yawg and be like, if you have it, you have it. But if that's the card in hand, I'm not going to lose. I kind of take some time to think about it, trying to figure out the most optimal line, just because there's a lot of different lines I could take here. But I think at the end of the day, I just jam in the spell and see what happens.
Yeah, 6 mana in this deck is like borderline infinite mana. So having a full hand of cards and 6 mana at your disposal, there's probably at least a few lines of play that you have with a full grip.
Yeah, for sure. I think here maybe I pass so I can just quarter calling X equals 3, or I just have endurance in hand.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really remember at this point.
Yeah, you did pass.
I just know I feel very far ahead and I wasn't super worried. Must just be an endurance in hand, and I just flash it in on the head step after a verdict.
All right, so there goes your board. You still have an undying creature left, and you still have a grist in play, which once again is a perfect example of the query that they have when playing this deck and trying to deal with your threats.
On my left.
You right there? Oh, shut off?
So I have dual monitors over here. I don't actually have like a light to like get a little more brightness.
Mm-hmm.
So I just have YouTube on both my TVs, going with 3 hours of pure bright light.
It's one way to do it.
For sure.
That's smart. I've never heard that approach. All right, so opponent is at 9 life. You're swinging for 6. They have 1 card in hand, which I believe is a I forget the name of the card. The 3 mana counter spell. Yes, Archmage Charm. And
I just forced my opponent to do.
Now
There's
they're
not a whole lot I can do. So I was like, I can't die to the colonnade. I just got to do what I can and see what happens.
Yep.
At this point, my opponent's looking at what's going on, seeing is there any out. And if I remember correctly, he just extends the